Next on the news.
It's enough. Enough is enough.
Putting an end to gun violence, the president and the mayor of New York City coming together, and the delicate balancing act of curbing violent crime while guarding against excessive policing. At least 13 people are dead, including children, as U.S. Special Forces take out a terrorist compound in northwest Syria, a top ISIS leader blowing himself up during the raid. Then calls for unity at the multi-faith annual prayer breakfast. Political leaders and their religious counterparts coming together to pray and build relationships. And the massive storm threatening millions from Mexico to the Canadian border. Could New York be blanketed in ice by the time it's all over? I'm Christine Persichetti. Currents News starts right now. It's a meeting of the minds on the streets of New York, a safety summit held by President Joe Biden and the city's mayor, Eric Adams. The mission? Stopping gun violence following a spike in shootings and the murder of 2 police officers. But how do we keep our cities safe from gun violence without being tough on crime? Jessica Easthope takes a look at their plan.
In just January alone, 24 police officers were shot in New York City. But the deaths of 2 of them, detectives Jason Rivera and Wilbert Mora, are shedding light on how rampant violent crime in the Big Apple has become.
Enough is enough, because we know we can do things about this, but for the resistance we're getting from some sectors of the government.
New Yorkers are calling for change, including the NYPD chaplain who met with the families of the slain officers.
Hopefully these times change. Hopefully through our politicians we get back to some more law and order in society.
During President Joe Biden's visit to the city Thursday, he opposed defunding the police.
The answer is not to defund the police. It's to give you the tools, the training, the funding, to be partners, to be protectors.
The president came at the invitation of Mayor Eric Adams and joined Governor Kathy Hochul and United States Attorney General Merrick Garland. Mayor Adams is asking the president to federally fund a 9/11 response to the violence.
This room came together, some of the finest men and women in law enforcement, and they meet every day to zero in on the violence that is attempting to take our way of life.
And the rise in violence isn't just in New York, it's across the country. Last year, 16 cities broke their own murder records, including Philadelphia and Atlanta. So far this year, 316 people have been shot, 106 killed. 64 children have been shot and injured, and 26 killed by guns.
There's no violation of a Second Amendment right. We talk like there's no amendment that's absolute.
With midterm elections coming up, the country is keeping a close eye on the president's response. He's facing a balancing act of getting guns off the street, but also keeping his promise of police reform. Jessica Easthope, Currents News.
Let's take a closer look into the specifics of President Biden's plan to curb violent crime. It includes 5 core elements. First is to stem the flow of guns, known as the Iron Pipeline, provide more federal support for law enforcement, invest in community initiatives, expand summer programs and employment opportunities for teenagers and young adults, and help former convicts successfully re-enter their communities.
Thanks to the bravery of our troops, this horrible terrorist leader is no more.
President Biden announcing an ISIS leader was killed in the biggest U.S. raid in Syria in years. That White House news conference happening Thursday morning. The president says the raid, which happened Wednesday evening, was meant to send a warning to all terrorist groups. No matter where they hide, we will find you. Karen Kaifa has the story, and we just want to let you know some of these images may disturb you.
President Biden says U.S. Special Forces have killed a top ISIS leader in northwest Syria.
Thanks to the bravery of our troops, this horrible terrorist leader is no more.
The Pentagon said U.S. Central Command conducted the mission that killed ISIS leader Abu Ibrahim al-Hashimi al-Qurashi. It is the biggest operation carried out by U.S. forces in Syria since the raid that led to the death of then ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi in October 2019. Biden said all Americans involved in the mission returned safely and acted with bravery.
The members of our military are the solid steel backbone of this nation, ready to fly into danger at a moment's notice to keep our country and the American people safe, as well as our allies.
Sources on the ground said shelling and explosions preceded an airdrop of U.S. forces shortly after midnight, targeting a house on the border between Turkey and Syria. They say at least 13 people were killed. Biden says al-Qurashi detonated a bomb that killed him and members of his own family, including women and children.
In a final act of desperate cowardness, he, with no regard to the lives of his own family or others in the building, he chose to blow himself up.
The operation came amid an ISIS resurgence in parts of Syria and Iraq. In Washington, Karen Kafa, Currents News.
The Pentagon will conduct a more thorough after-action review of the raid, but did call the mission successful. More now on the scene of that raid, Syria's northwest province of Idlib. The region is largely controlled by Turkish-backed fighters and is an al-Qaeda stronghold. Idlib is home to several of the group's top operatives. The past decade has been particularly brutal for Christians in the country. At the start of the Syrian civil war more than a decade ago, they made up about 10% of the population. Now that number is down to about 5%, with fewer than 700,000 Christians left. They are severely persecuted under Islamic militants, with bans on their religious practices, seizure of their property, and some Christians even being singled out for death. Meanwhile, it looks like some help from the U.S. may be arriving in Ukraine. The country's defense minister tweeted out these pictures of what he says are 85 tons of combat ammunition for grenade launchers from the United States. The U.S. has sent more troops to Europe amid the ongoing crisis in Ukraine as Russian troops continue to amass near the border. But military leaders here are hopeful diplomacy will prevail. Prayers for a unified country went out Thursday morning at the National Prayer Breakfast on Capitol Hill.
Teach us, O gracious God, how to love one another.
After the opening prayer, President Biden, who, as you know, is Catholic, addressed the faithful gathered, a much smaller crowd than in previous years. He urged Congress to come together, stressing the importance of unifying the country.
As leaders of this nation who work and pray together, there's an oath to God and country to uphold and a charge to keep, to stand in the breach and to protect our democracy, to work together to right wrongs. That's why we all came here, to make the most of our time on earth.
Biden says a house divided cannot stand, but a house united can do anything. A massive winter storm is slamming much of the country, with rain, snow, and ice hitting more than 24 states. That's causing big problems for people on the go as highways, rail lines, and airports shut down. Daryl Forges reports.
A train crushing a car stuck on snowy tracks. The driver escaping without injuries, according to police. A truck sliding off the road and flipping into a creek. Another jackknife on the side of the road. These are the scenes on roadways across a 2,000-mile stretch of the U.S. as a winter storm pummels more than 24 states.
You just got to stay cautious. You know, it's pretty bad, obviously. Just drive slow, take your time.
The dangerous weather grinding travel to a halt.
Looking forward to it. Heading to the airport this afternoon, which who knows if I'll get where I'm trying to go.
As the storm system pushes farther east, forecasters say it will deliver a frigid mix of hazards.
We are dealing with one of the most significant icing events that we've had in the state of Texas in at least several decades.
In Texas, the storm will test the state's power grid, which suffered catastrophic outages last February.
At the expected peak demand, there should be about 10,000 megawatts of extra power capacity.
Governor Greg Abbott says that is enough surplus to power about 2 million homes, though tens of thousands are already without power. In Detroit, Daryl Forges, Currents News.
So what will that mean for New York City? Well, if you're scared of snow, you can breathe a sigh of relief. No inches will be added to the snow pile left from the last week's storm. Instead, you'll see some freezing rain and sleet, which could lead to some icing as temperatures drop. That's expected to stay through the weekend until temperatures warm up next week. There's a lot more news headed your way. Police departments across the nation continue to face challenges. Why staffing shortages are at the top of the list for many. And this.
Now, at one point, our people were dying, our doctors too.
Healthcare workers giving their lives to help save lives, how they say their faith has helped them through this pandemic. And looking like a scene from March of the Penguins, one art installation takes a Connecticut town by storm.
There are now some big changes to the tablet website. You can get personalized access to the Catholic news you value. Sign up for free at thetablet.org.
New Yorkers are frustrated with the rising crime and seemingly weak response to it. It's a sentiment echoed by Jason Rivera's grieving widow during his funeral mass on Friday, when she took aim at Manhattan's new district attorney, Alvin Bragg, for being soft on crime.
The system continues to fail us. We are not safe anymore. Not even the members of the service. I know you were tired of these laws, especially the ones from the new DA.
Bragg has vowed to, quote, stay the course despite the criticism. But Mayor Adams is turning up the heat, specifically addressing Dominique Luzuriaga's comments, saying reforms without justice is not enough.
I respond to her by asking all of our electeds, as we look at the pursuit we had for criminal justice reform, it was needed. But we did not have those who were focusing on public safety in the room when we made those reforms. We must have the justice we deserve, but we must have the safety we need.
The mayor went on to say that the laws need to be tweaked so that judges do not have the discretion to determine which offenders are returned to the streets. It's been difficult for police officers all over the country. 2 officer funerals in less than a week in New York, another shot while off duty, and in Virginia, 2 campus officers were killed after getting shot on the job. The dangers of policing, just one of several reasons why departments across the country are facing staffing shortages. Ryan Young went on patrol to learn more.
I've never seen the morale so low. I've never seen the rank so low. I've never seen the level of violence that we're seeing now.
Basically, we're one bullet away from death and one mistake away from indictment.
So less people want to become cops and more cops wanting to leave the job earlier.
Durham Police Chief Patrice Andrews routinely patrols her city and knows firsthand the impact of officer shortages.
The 911 calls don't stop. So, people are still having emergencies. So the emergencies don't stop. And certainly the emergencies don't care if, you are 60% staffed or below. And the expectation is that we continue the level of service that we've always done.
Maintaining that level of service is difficult when you're down 90 officers and constantly battling against COVID and negative perceptions of law enforcement, along with low wages.
They've got to be able to support their families. We have officers that can't even qualify for apartments because their income doesn't match up with what the apartments require.
For decorated officers like newly retired Atlanta police officer Tyrone Dennis, his pay didn't keep up with his career.
It would be foolish for me to stay for $48,000 when I have a wife and 3 kids to feed. For $48,000, I can almost, and a family with 3 kids, I can almost qualify for public assistance.
In Seattle, 356 of more than 1,300 officers have left the police force over the last 2 years. In Austin, they're short 117 officers, 15% less than what their workforce could be. In Phoenix, 411 officers, 13% of their force. And in Philadelphia, that department is short some 440 officers, and beat officers are feeling the pressure. John McNesby, the president of Philadelphia's police union, says even finding people to apply has never been tougher.
Just last week, we had a recruitment assessment. They were invited to come in for the initial assessment. We had 600 people that were invited. Just shy of 200 showed up, and out of those 200, only 26 walked away, moving on to the next step.
Despite the challenges, there are still standout recruits who are eager to join the force.
I want to be a change in the community. I want to uplift the community and at the same time be a positive role model.
The typical police academy takes 8 months to finish, meaning it will take years to fill the open jobs at departments across the country.
Police chiefs are wondering who are going to be the cops of the future. And part of that is, how do we train the police differently? How do we select differently? All of those challenges.
Departments are trying to be more creative in their recruiting, offering bonuses and traveling the country looking for the next generation of officers.
That was Ryan Young reporting. The FBI says intentional killings of law enforcement officers hit a 20-year high last year. Pope Francis expressed his gratitude to the men and women who maintain law and order at the Vatican Thursday. The Holy Father meeting with Italy's state police and their families. The force is also responsible for keeping the Pope safe during his pastoral visits and personal excursions throughout Italy. Francis offered these words of gratitude to the officers. "I would like to encourage you so that your service, sometimes difficult, is always supported by its fundamental motivation to take care of people, protecting the dignity and safety of each one." American hospitals could be looking abroad to fix a nursing shortage. Reports say there are an unusually high number of green cards available this year for foreign professionals, including nurses. That's because U.S. consulates that were shut down during the pandemic weren't issuing visas to relatives of citizens. That means that by law, those unused slots could go to eligible workers. Medicare will soon start paying for at-home COVID tests. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services announcing they will foot the bill starting in early spring. The tests will have to be bought from participating pharmacies and retailers. The centers will release a list of eligible places once the coverage begins. Until then, the government suggests Medicare enrollees order free tests through the federal program. This as the U.S. Army says soldiers who haven't been vaccinated will be immediately discharged. Those service members will not receive involuntary separation pay and may have to pay back any special compensation bonuses they received. The Pentagon says 97% of the 1.3 million active duty service members in the U.S. have received at least one shot. So far, fewer than 100 service members have failed to comply. The doctor who founded Somos Community Care, which serves migrants and the poor in New York City, is reflecting on the worst of the pandemic and how his faith helped him get through it.
At one point, our people were dying. Our doctors, too. 12 of them died, 5 during that period.
Healthcare workers giving their lives to help save lives in their community during the darkest days of the pandemic. But Dr. Ramon Talaj says their faith helped them see the light at the end of the tunnel.
And then on March 26th, I told the employees I saw during the day that whenever they got home, be it in 6 in the morning or 7 at night, to change, eat, and be ready for prayer at 8 p.m. That was the first day. And that's what we've been doing non-stop since.
Somos Community Care has been on the front lines of the COVID-19 pandemic since the start, taking care of patients, distributing tests, even food, and setting up hotlines to answer questions in different languages. The organization put $30 million from its own savings toward helping the community, serving 40,000 people a day, administering more than 2 million tests and hundreds of thousands of vaccines. They even covered funeral costs for people who couldn't afford them. Before the pandemic, back in 2019, Dr. Talaj met Pope Francis to tell him about the network of family physicians he'd founded.
Esta solidaridad con los enfermos es un verdadero tesoro y es un signo distintivo del cuidado y la asistencia sanitaria auténtica que ponen en el centro de la persona y sus necesidades.
Neither could have known what a treasure it would really become during the pandemic. But Dr. Talaj thinks the pandemic will be overcome soon. That's why he's advocating for preventive medicine so people don't have to be hospitalized or receive painful treatment.
Prevention is very important. Prevention, if we start with today's young people, will make it so less people have complications with diabetes in the future or with hypertension or stroke. These problems are those that cause health disasters and economic troubles toward the end of life.
Somos serves at least 700,000 people in New York. Still to come on Currents News, Catholic Schools Week may be nearing its end, but the fun isn't slowing down. Students in the diocese show up to class dressed as their favorite characters. Plus,
I drove by and thought, am I seeing things or am I seeing a field of penguins in the snow?
How the handiwork of one artist transformed the weekend's winter weather into the talk of the town. Do you have a story idea or want to share a tip? Email us at newstips@desalesmedia.org or call our 24-hour number, 718-517-3122. We'll be right back. Catholic Schools Week may be nearing its end, but that's not stopping students in the Diocese of Brooklyn from joining in on the fun. At Our Lady of Trust Catholic Academy in Canarsie, teachers encouraged some friendly competition with their annual sports day. The students got a taste for speed while facing off in a relay race, and some even got to show off their muscles with a classic game of tug of war. But the fun didn't stop there. In Bensonhurst, Wonder Woman and Harry Potter showed up for class. It was all part of St. Athanasius Catholic Academy's Storybook Character Day, where students get to go to school dressed as their favorite characters from books, fairy tales, and movies. It even gave them the opportunity to share some of their favorite books with their classmates. But if you're a mom or dad, you know parenting isn't always a fairy tale, and sometimes you've just got to let your frustration go. Wow, that's what a group of Massachusetts moms are doing. They gathered last week for a collective mom scream after 2 years of stress and exhaustion from the pandemic. A mom who's also a therapist organized the event. She says she got the idea from her clients who needed a release of emotion, and these moms say they enjoyed yelling in unison.
Even though I don't know these ladies, I just felt like we could all relate. Like, it was just such an awesome release. I don't even feel the cold.
The therapist says screaming can be very cathartic, and doing it as a group offers a feeling of community. We can all relate. In Connecticut, penguins have taken over a town by storm, and it's all thanks to the handiwork of one artist who took advantage of the recent snowstorm and turned it into a winter wonderland. Matt McFarland is in Guilford and explains why it's putting smiles on people's faces.
It's not Antarctica, rather it's Guilford's town green covered with a fresh blanket of white snow and dozens of penguins. 99 of them, to be exact.
We just thought it was fantastic and wanted to know exactly what it was and why it's here.
It's sort of magical. I drove by and thought, am I seeing things, or am I seeing a field of penguins in the snow? Is that possible, or are my eyes deceiving me?
They're not. Rather, this March of the Penguins, dozens of lifelike wooden cutouts, is the work of a local artist. And from the biggest kids to the littlest ones, everyone seems to be pretty pleased with all these penguins. Like Donna Hardy, who stopped by with her great niece and nephew up visiting from Louisiana for the perfect photo op.
I was excited to see them, and we just had a chance today to come see them, so they're very cute. We love it.
The anonymous artist's daughter said he had been waiting for the right time, the perfect storm, you could say, to spring his penguins on the town green. And this weekend's snow turned out to be the perfect canvas.
I think it's absolutely fabulous that we live in a town where someone cares enough to take the time and energy to spread joy. It's a fabulous thing.
While the artist wishes to remain anonymous, his daughter did put a post on Facebook saying that her father just loves how happy all these penguins are making people.
He got it right.
Well, I hope he's sitting over there watching this.
I hope he can recognize that he has accomplished what he set out to do.
Making people smile, especially after the past 2 years, and what for many has been a pretty difficult time.
It just makes you happy.
Oh, it does.
Yeah.
And we could all use a little bit of that. I mean, it's January, it's, still COVID time, and yet to see something like this just makes you feel hopeful and happy all over again.
Whoever did it, thank you.
That was Matt McFarland reporting. While the artist is unsure how long the penguins will stay on the Guilford Green, he says he's just happy that he's making people smile. And all of those stories just made me smile. And that is Currents News. I'm Christine Persichetti. Thank you for joining us, because we are putting your faith in the news. I hope to see you again next time.